What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. My name is Jacob Restituto, and today we have a very different and very exciting and fun interview. Really cool, fun banter. Really just refreshing. It was, we talked for about an hour, and it felt like a second to me. It was really fun. So we talked about something different today. We had Jared Goodrum on the channel, and we talked about just being in the Navy music group, and it's really interesting, his story and all that aspects of it. So stick around and enjoy. Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. My name is Jacob Restituto, and I'm a musician from Northport, New York. And today we have the absolute pleasure of having Jared Goodrum here on the channel. Jared, thank you so much for taking the time. I really appreciate your time.
Absolutely, man. Thanks for having me, man. It's a pleasure.
My pleasure. My pleasure. It's going to be a really good conversation. I'm really intrigued to hear your story, especially you being a part of essentially the musicians group in the Navy. Really looking forward to hearing. First of all, thank you for your service. I want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart for your service, and looking forward to this conversation.
Appreciate that, man. Thank you for your support, man. It means a lot.
Absolutely. So for those who aren't super familiar with your story, I'd love to hear if you could kind of just share a little bit who you are and what you do in the music industry and kind of how you got to where you are in the music industry.
Sure. So I've been playing saxophone for about 17 years now. Nothing too remarkable, to be honest. You know, my dad was a band director for 30 years in Albuquerque, New Mexico. That's where I'm originally from. And so it taught me how to play saxophone around sixth grade, and went through his band program and fell in love with it from the jump. I remember in school them asking me what I wanted to do what career do you want to have when you grow up? And I knew even in sixth grade, I wanted to be a professional saxophone player from the get-go. So I always had it, even before I could play hot cross buns, I had it in my mind that I wanted to, that I really wanted to really do it and be an entertainer. So, went through middle school, went through high school, was a complete band nerd, loved band, didn't care about any of my other grades, only cared about band. And went to college at UNM, and stayed on the track of music, and got my bachelor's in general music over there, and immediately auditioned for the Navy fleet bands and got the audition, and got sent to Japan as my first duty station, and was able to travel the world and go to places I never thought I would be able to go, and leave just a little bit of I would like to think I left a little bit of an impression, a little bit of a musical impression on everywhere I went. So got to achieve my dream in that way, because that was the big goal.
Yeah, absolutely. I read a little bit about your story. I was doing a little research. Just to kind of put it a little bit more, like it kind of rephrase what you were saying, is I read a quote from you, essentially said that one of your dreams was to essentially tour the world with music, and it's essentially, share music with as many people as you could. And like you said, you were able to achieve that dream through the Navy. Absolutely. Going to all these different countries and playing for all these different people you might not have had the opportunity to. So I thought that was really an interesting way to think about just sharing music, and an interesting avenue as well.
Yes, yeah. It was and it, you have to go into it, bore people too much, but I got lucky coming in the Navy and being able to go to Japan. When you come in, nothing's guaranteed of where you're going to end up going. I could have gone to any of the other fleet bands, and it would have been fine, but I got lucky enough to be able to go to Japan, and that band does a lot more than most other fleet bands in terms of touring and being able to go around the world and do those types of things. There's only about, I think, 3 other bands that actually get to do that, and even they don't do it to the extent that Seventh Fleet will do it over in Japan. So
yeah, so essentially, to kind of rephrase what I read online, if I'm correct,
sure.
or if I'm wrong, essentially the goal of the U.S. Seventh Fleet Orient Express band, I believe, which you were in, right, is essentially to continue establishing relations with all these U.S. countries that U.S. has excuse me, relations that the United States has relationships with, and essentially just kind of do something fun, which is music, which I think is a really a pretty cool, relationship builder, I guess you could say, between nations.
Absolutely, yeah. And it's that's the thing. I think it's we're a really small community. Our rate is called MUs for musician, and we're a very, very small community in the Navy. There's only, I want to say, don't quote me on it, but I think there's only like maybe 500 of us in the entire Navy.
Wow.
So we're very, very small. We practically all know each other. And I think being able to, uh, most what people see the ships, people see, people in uniform, people see a lot of the battle-esque stuff that we do. The the music side doesn't get showcased a lot because frankly, there's not a lot of us,
Yeah.
So there's even within the Navy, I can't count how many times I go to other sailors, Marines, Army, soldiers that have never heard or didn't even know that we existed because we're such a niche,
Sure.
rate in the
Sure.
Navy. But the effect that we have when we do it right, and the keyword one, when we do it right,
Sure.
we can do some pretty cool things that I think really impact relationships, like you were talking about, relationships between countries, which is big, big stuff.
Absolutely. And not only that, like it's really actually really interesting to think about, just in the sense of like going even farther on a deeper political science level, I guess you could talk about, in the sense of like, say this is an individual's first time interacting with an American, and
Exactly.
that interaction is some fun music or some really talented music. That's one level of it, and an additional level is the aspect of like, I saw some photos of you playing in Manila, Philippines.
Right.
And first of all, the photography was ridiculous. It was like it
Yeah.
was like such a crisp photo. But point being, though, is like you were playing in like an auditorium of kids, and you could see that
Right.
there was either teachers or parents standing in the background of the photo,
Right.
or in the background of the auditorium. And it's interesting in the sense of like, there are so many stories that you hear of these famous musicians be like, yeah, when I was 7 years old, I went to this concert and saw so and so play, and I just knew that I wanted to be music. And like, how many people are being on tour like that? And especially, if you, I don't know how much you did for the young kids, but like the influence that you might have had on some of them, that you, who knows, they might be the next Prince, or Michael Jackson, or
Absolutely.
right. It is
Absolutely.
very, very cool opportunity.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. It was, just talking about it gives me goosebumps because, you know, um, speaking frankly, a lot of what we do on a day-to-day basis, we get to practice, we get to rehearse. A lot of it is, a desk job. We're on a computer. We're doing a lot of other stuff, on the computer.
Music related or unmusic, not music related?
On non-music related government stuff that they call them collaterals that we have to do on the side. So when we get the opportunity, especially like I said, when you get the opportunity to go to a band like Seventh Fleet and go to these types of countries, at least for me, I'll speak for myself. You're very hungry to want to inspire, to
Sure.
want to take advantage of that opportunity, to really try to give an impact. I grew up in Albuquerque, New Mexico, my entire life, so we would go for little family trips here and there to Louisiana, but never really saw a lot of the rest of the country, to automatically going into the Navy and going to Japan and see and going to see all these different countries. So I would get feedback from kids in Malaysia or the
Yeah.
Philippines, or we went to Palau about, hey, this is the first time that I've ever seen a saxophone, or this is the first time I've seen, live horns or heard live horns, or this is the first time that,
Yeah.
that we've had a live performance, or, and that was infinitely, impactful to me because, to be that first for them, to help them be the exposure to music,
Yeah.
in that
Yeah.
way was just incredible.
No, that is a really, how many times, I'm a guitar player, a little bit of piano and stuff, but more so,
Yeah,
and I sing and stuff, but like everybody's heard singers, most people have heard guitarists, but like,
sure.
if you go to certain areas of the world, they might, like you said, might not have heard of the saxophone. And to be the first introduction of an instrument to somebody it's a pretty remarkable, impact,
It blew my
especially,
mind.
something like the saxophone, because like I've always said, like if I could learn any instrument, it'd be either the drums or the saxophone, because there are
Sure.
so much emotion behind both those instruments.
Right,
You can
right.
feel when you hear that saxophone, go on it starts breaking because he's like screaming through the saxophone.
Absolutely.
I can't explain it, but like, what
I
I'm
hear
talking
you.
about.
I hear you.
Exactly, right? And like you just
Yeah.
feel it, man. You feel it
Right.
differently than you do when somebody's like jamming on the piano or even the guitar. There's something
Sure.
like there's something emotive in the first with the drums and also the saxophone. So that
Sure.
being said, to introduce somebody to that, an instrument of that power,
Yeah.
is a really cool experience, I gotta say.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. It was a pleasure, man. And it's funny you say that because I feel that way. I've literally said the same thing about guitar. You know, I think the grass is always greener, but I've always said if I could learn a different instrument, it would always be
Touche, touche.
guitar or piano. You know, so
Sure, touche.
you know
That's funny.
it.
I would love to talk just briefly. As a musician, one of my goals is to go on tour,
Sure,
as many musicians, and I'm curious, just typical tour life versus Army or Navy tour life.
sure.
Is it typically like, is it the same thing that you would expect from like a, outside of the Navy tour, or is it like totally different because you're in the Navy? Like, what does tour life look like?
Yeah, that's a good question. So for Navy, I think it's different. I haven't had the opportunity to um, go on tour as a civilian yet. That's a goal of mine that I desperately still want to do when I get out of the Navy. But we have so many musicians who have done tours before they joined the Navy and then have had an opportunity to compare. And from what they told me, it's pretty different just because there's a lot of red tape and there's a lot of, as you can imagine, a lot of regulations and boundaries that we can't cross versus being a civilian and being able to have a little bit more freedom to make decisions on the fly or make an audible or be a little bit more flexible. In
Hmm.
the Navy, I think there's a lot more, and this is the case with any military band. There's a lot more kind of rules and regulations that can get in the way of uh, from song selection to
Mm,
where we're going to do it, to especially when it comes to finances, to all these different types of stuff. It's a lot more structured and kind of set for you of what the boxes to check of
sure,
how to do that tour. So I think the experience when it comes down to the performance is pretty similar,
sure.
but I think that as a civilian, you get a lot more opportunities to do gigs that I don't think you're going to see a military band at. You're not going to see a military band at playing at college parties or playing at, college campuses and in that kind of way. You might see them more in the music hall, your different. So there's a little bit of crossover there, but I think they are pretty different, in terms of the life.
Now, what does travel look like though? Do you travel just the band, or do you travel as a whole Navy, like where your ship is going? How does that work?
So for us, most fleet bands, we travel as the band. So
Wow, cool.
we have
That
our
is
own
cool.
mission of where we're going to go. Most of the time, and they're my favorite gigs, as we were talking about it in Japan. Most of the gigs that we do, we try to do a lot of education. So we try to go to like a lot of elementary schools, middle schools, high schools, trying to go to the universities and trying to put on clinics, trying to put on master classes,
Wow.
stuff like that. Because what's cool about the Navy is that I don't think I would have had the opportunity to meet some of these world class musicians if it wasn't for the Navies. A lot of these guys, I joke around with them because they come in with doctorates or 2 doctorates, or
Wow.
they come in with masters, and I wouldn't have had the opportunity to play with them, to study with them, to learn from them. I would have ended up having to pay to take a lesson with
Yeah, sure.
with a lot of these guys, but
Huh.
they end up being my colleagues to do this. So it's cool that I get the Navy kind of attracts different experience levels from all over the world. So you get an opportunity to kind of to learn from different musicians from in all different types of aspects. But to answer your question,
Yeah,
we do end up doing mostly education.
sure. No, it's such a fascinating thing though, because you see like you see how influenced children are, good or bad. So like if you have the opportunity to influence them in a positive way at that age, it's a really it's a very, very, very interesting that's a pretty cool. I haven't necessarily heard about that. I've heard about the military bands where especially when they're playing for the other military, like as like a morale booster. But I hadn't heard about the, I guess, would you call it,
Yeah, like
nation.
outreach.
Yeah, nation outreach or something, I guess.
Right.
Yeah, I want to say public relations, but it's not necessarily public relations. It's more like
Yeah, I mean, it's around the same guidelines, like public outreach or
yeah,
just trying to be a positive influence.
yeah, yeah,
Those are my favorite
cool,
gigs.
sure. Now, I would love to know with the I guess audition process. Like, how do you join like preliminary, do you join the Navy knowing that you're going to be a part of the music group, or do you go in as just a regular, grunt guy, and then you try out? How does that work?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. I'm glad you asked that too, because I think it's changed over time. So when I got in, and I think I was kind of the very beginning of it kind of changing, I joined in 2017. And for me, I auditioned with the Navy band before I went to go see a recruiter. And that's the key thing. If you're interested in the job, that's the way to do it. You don't go to the recruiter and tell them that you want to audition, because a lot of times the recruiters can lead you astray, or they can, it can go south real quick if they don't know. It's not even necessarily their fault all the time. Sometimes they just don't know about the rate, and they end up, making mistakes, or, there's been a lot of horror stories, as you can imagine. So you always want to make sure, and that's what I got told, you always want to make sure that you audition first, so that your contract is already written, ready to go.
Wow.
And you can come into your recruiter's office and go, hey, I already won the audition. I'm ready to go. The band's expecting me. This is what I need you to process. And then that way they go, oh, okay, you're already going in. Because the process for an average person to go in, you go to the recruiter, and then they look for a job for you to do. They're going to assess what you want to do. For a musician, if you're already coming in that way, again, kind of circling back, because we're so niche, because a lot of people haven't heard of us, even within the Navy, there can be a lot of confusion, and, things can go south real quick. So you always want to make sure that you audition with the Navy band, and you structure it that way before you end up going in. But the audition, to answer your question, the audition itself is what you can expect. As a saxophone player, I went in, they expected me to play my scales. We played a classical etude, and then we played a jazz etude, and then I improvised for them, and then they went back and assessed, how it went. And then I got the call, I think a couple weeks later that I got the job. So, and then now they're starting to structure the auditions kind of more like orchestral auditions, where they're bringing a whole swath of people to one audition, and then they'll sit there and have a panel of people to listen through, whether it's saxophone auditions or, different types of auditions to assess whether you make it, and even have rounds to go, okay, you made it to the semifinals, finals, or, what's going on. And that's just a fleet
best of the best.
Yeah. They're trying,
Yeah, for sure, man. Absolutely. Especially as a representative of the country, you hope they're the best.
Right. You would think. Absolutely.
I hope so. Absolutely. Well, I want to kind of segue a little bit into a little bit something you mentioned earlier in the start of your talk is you are from Albuquerque, New Mexico. Your dad is a music teacher there.
Yes.
And even before that, I want to take it even before that. Your grandfather was a part of a big band out of Massachusetts.
Right.
I believe it was good. Is it Goodrum and the Silver something?
Silver Kings. Yeah.
Silver
absolutely.
Kings. Okay. Yes.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So you come from a line of musicians,
Sure.
and I kind of just want to hear a little bit more so about the story of interactions in the musical household is the first part of that, but more so segueing from that, in addition to, is kind of like what it was like to learn from your dad. Because I think that that must mean you have a great relationship, I'm assuming, because if you didn't, you'd butt heads real quick.
Yeah.
But even still, like, I have a phenomenal relationship with my dad, but I don't know if I could like sit down and take a class from him.
Sure.
And I just love to hear that experience. And then not only that, but be so inspired by it that I want to. In fact, I'm wearing my dad's business shirt right now,
Yeah.
But like, I hated working for him when I worked for him, just because I want to support him and his business, right?
Right.
But as a summer, and kids as a summer, he's like, oh yeah, 12 to 16 or 18, 12 to 16 probably. I had to go work like 2 weeks, I think it was, in my dad's construction business, and I hated it. I hated it. Now he would teach me if I was sitting in a class to have to learn how to do. Oh my gosh, forget that.
Yeah.
So I'd love to hear that, but
yeah, my dad, he's retired now. He retired in 2014, but he was a band director, middle school band director for 30 years, and obviously he played saxophone.
Oh, he played sax as well. I didn't realize that. Oh, very interesting.
Yeah. He started on drums, and then he
just rub it in everything I want to play, right?
Yeah. Hey man, I couldn't play drums if my life depended on it, man. And he ended up switching over to saxophone in college, which was a really controversial thing at the time, you know. But anyway, he ended up being a band director, and I had my bigger brother. He's 8 years older than me. He they didn't force him to play saxophone, but they wanted him to try music, you know, and try a lot of things. But they wanted him to try music, and he just didn't take to it. It wasn't his thing. So when it came my time, you know, my dad had me try because you know band directors. If you know anything about band directors, they're always looking for, especially if they know a kid, or especially if their kid ends up going into music, they want you to play something that they need in their band, right?
Sure.
So he was trying to get me to play tuba, didn't like tuba, was terrible at it. Trying to get me to play trombone because he needed more trombone players, couldn't do it, just was terrible. Trumpet was even worse, you know. Tried all these instruments and just couldn't do it. He taught me saxophone, and I could get a note out of it, you know. I could get a couple notes out of it. And he was like, okay, I guess you're gonna end up, you know, playing saxophone. So you know, I started that way the summer before 6th grade. And, you know, he just taught me hot cross buns before I knew what hot cross buns was, you know, and could barely hold the thing, you know, and was trying to figure it out. And it's funny because when my dad would be trying to practice for himself, I would always come in with my saxophone, or I would come in with my little plastic, you know, recorder,
Yeah.
and he would get so annoyed. He'd go, "Oh God, you know what? I'm gonna go." And he would go practice at the school. So he would leave the house and go practice at the school. And that's an inside joke between us because now he's always trying to play with me when I'm trying to
Oh.
practice. I'm like, you know, I should go to the school because you know you're really annoying the hell out of me. But you know, I'm you know just you know poking fun. But anyway, so I started in his band program. And my dad was very like, he was very like, I don't want to be biased towards my son. You know,
Sure.
he's in my band program. I don't want to give him any special treatment or anything. And I love that he treated me just like any one of the other kids. But it became harder when 7th grade came around and I started to learn how to improvise. And like a lot of other kids, you learn that blues scale, and that blues scale is like the biggest mind blowing. Oh my goodness! Like I can really make some music with this. Now I'm really starting to be able to express myself.
Mm.
So one day, we had I had the Standard of Excellence. We had the Standard of Excellence exercise books, and I'm playing along with it. I had a CD, put it in the computer, and I would play to it. It was just a B flat jam, you know. And I'm playing to it, and I'm starting to really make some headway. And I knew I was doing something because my dad, you know, cracked the door open in my room, and he goes, "You keep at it. There's something there. Like there's something there that you're hitting on." And I went, "Oh, you know, okay, this I'm starting to make some progress here." You know, and that was the beginning because now you start getting your confidence because you know
Sure, exactly.
you're at that age where you're trying to figure out what you're good at. You know, this is 12, 13, 14 years old. Other kids are figuring out, oh, they're good at the football team, basketball team, you know, swimming, all this different stuff. And I was like, oh, I think this might be my thing. You know, this might be what I'm finally good at. So my dad he would give me some lessons here and there, but he really wanted to make sure that he wasn't giving me any special treatment versus the other kids. So a lot of times I would ask him, "Hey, you know, Dad, blah 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 blah. You know, what kind of mouthpiece or yet?" And he'd be like, "I'll tell you in class," or you know, "I'll show you in class." Or so I was like, "Man, Dad," you know. Or a lot of times, you know, we would do a concert and I would kill it at the concert, just be slaying at the concert, you know. And the parents would come up, "Oh man, you know, Jared, you killed it at that. Your son is so crazy, you know." And I'd be like, "Hey, Dad, what do you think?" And he'd be like, "Yeah, you did all right. You did all right." He didn't want to float my ego, you know, too much. You know, he was like, "Yeah, okay." And it wasn't until high school where I was in a different band program and had been, you know, developed more, where he was like, "Okay, I can finally be just a parent.
Mm.
I can finally be like just a parent and support you rather than being the band director and trying to find a line between not giving special treatment and everything else." High school, he was able to be like, "Oh my God, like you killed it. You know, that's what I'm trying to do." And I was like, "Well, where was this in middle school? How come, you know?" so,
Yeah.
so I think it was hard for him to kind of find the line until high school and college. In high school and college, when I started really getting the fundamentals and I still started really developing and started really getting a more refined sound and all the more complex things, my dad was able to kind of go, okay, you're actually really dedicated to this. This is something that you really want to do. Now I'm gonna try to push you, give you the rocket ship to push you to the moon, type of thing. So
Yeah, that's a great story, man. It's very very that's you're a great storyteller in general. Let
oh,
me say
thank
that.
you,
Yeah,
man. I
absolutely.
appreciate that.
Very cool. And a very cool interactions between you and your dad. It was fun listening to that. But it is a very special, I guess, relationship to also to learn from your dad like that too. And again, like I love my dad. I learned so much from him. But being in a class is a different, totally different dynamic. So that's so
It's
funny.
funny we were talking about this, man, because just recently, so I was in Japan and was there for 3 years, and I didn't come home because it was just so expensive to come home, and then COVID happened during that time too, and so I didn't get to see my family for that entire time in Japan. And I came back to the States, and of course missed my family, and it wasn't until just this year, this past summer, my parents visited, and they hadn't seen me perform in like 6 years.
Wow.
And my dad, my dad had the opportunity to actually play with me, and we just played on like Superstition. We just jammed on Superstition with the band. But it was the first time that me and my dad got to really play together in over, it's got to be 6-7 years. That we had the opportunity to actually play together in the Navy band and have that interaction, with each other. So it was kind of a full circle thing because the first time me and my dad ever played together was at the middle school
Yeah.
talent show. We played at the middle school talent show all the way back then, and that was so much fun. I could barely knew my scales during that back then, and we're playing, and all these years later now we're playing and here in Washington and got to do that. So that was a really special experience.
No, that is a really cool experience. Thank you for sharing this story.
Absolutely, man. Yeah.
So I would love to kind of segue again to some of those other things you've done into now. I kind of just want to give you your flowers, as they say, in the sense of some of the cool things you've done. So not only have you toured with all these musicians in the Navy, but you've also done some pretty cool things. Like I guess they would call it I don't know with promo work for the military. I guess right was the way back home. The Wilton Felder that was through the military, correct?
It was, yeah.
So,
it was.
given a little backstory, and then I'll let you explain it. Is essentially a cover song from a famous American jazz musician, correct?
Absolutely, absolutely.
And you guys did it with the military band,
Yeah.
and it's phenomenal. And there'll be a link in the description so you can check it out.
Thank you.
But it was a very well done, very cool. So let's hand it over to you to explain it a little better.
Yeah, so I got to give a shout out to Chief James Cho over at 7th Fleet right now. He's still over in Japan. He had just rotated over there when we did that video, and he was the first class back then. And it was I got to give him all the credit, man. It was his idea to do that. It was my idea to put the car in there. I'm a big car guy, but it was his idea, his vision. To put it together. Another shout out to a guy who just got out of the Navy, Francisco Ortiz, amazing drummer, but he was the one that did all the film work for a lot of that stuff. So super talented guy. And it was kind of in the car world, I guess they call it, it's kind of a Skunks Works type of thing, because it was a lot of that was filmed after hours, not during the work day. A lot of it was kind of behind the scenes when a lot of people didn't know what's going on. We kind of went through these other channels to make it happen. With that video, and but the philosophy with it was Cho. He loved that song, and we would play to it. He's a great trombone player. We would play to it, just jamming to it anyway. Just having fun. Expressing ourselves, playing on it in Japan. And he said, "I think I want to do a video with this song." And I was like, "Oh yeah, this would be great." And when I was practicing he was like, "I want to feature you. I wanted to kind of be your thing." And so I went home and was shedding on it, and was trying to, come up with something for it, and really got to get inside the song and kind of define it for myself, and kind of related to the story with my dad. Being in Japan, like I said, I hadn't been out of Albuquerque, New Mexico, really ever, besides little trips here and there. So being, going to boot camp, going to A school in Virginia, getting rotated to Japan, I was incredibly homesick. Both me and my wife were very homesick. We missed home. Going to different countries was great, life-changing experience, but it really made me appreciate Albuquerque, New Mexico for what it was. It really made me miss the simplicity in it, And through that song, it really, I'd like to think, and my mom, I think, got the message when she listened to it. I didn't say anything when I showed it to her, but she said it sounded like you were longing for coming home, in that solo,
Sure.
like you were screaming to try to come home. And I was
Sure.
like, that's exactly, without saying anything, that's exactly what I was trying to do, to convey in that song. So that song means a lot to me. We perform it with this band here, which is a phenomenal band over here, this rock band that I'm playing with right now. And I get goosebumps and I got to hold back tears every time I play it because it reminds me of being in Japan and the longing of wanting to come home back to New Mexico and see my friends and family. That's what that solo and kind of the energy in that song I was trying to convey, behind that. So
it's a perfect depiction of how music can speak without actually having lyrics or words in it.
absolutely,
How she was able to hear that, and many people are able to hear that, and you're even able to express that without necessarily expressing it with, you're communicating through the language of music essentially, without actually
absolutely,
communicating through words. It's a really cool example, a clear example of that.
absolutely. And I think, not to go on a little bit of a tangent, but I think that that's something that I don't think it's, I don't know if it doesn't get talked about as much or it's not as prevalent as it used to be. I don't
I
think
completely
instrumental
agree with
music,
you.
you know what I'm saying? I don't think
Absolutely.
it's as prevalent as it used to be. That um, I don't think you see as much of the instrumental expression like that as you used to maybe in the 80s, 90s, definitely going back earlier than that. So I was glad that I was able to express that, and would love to see that more and more in pop music and in music of today.
It's interesting that you say that because I completely agree with you. And as you were saying that though, I was kind of formulating in my head like my response of like I would say that it'd probably be, I don't know, since the introduction of like I'd say electronic instruments in pop
Yes.
music, that it's changed. Where, for example, like and even in the 70s and 80s, you'd have these wicked guitar solos and and rock music. But then as soon as you started like as hip hop started to come in, when we started using samples, and then from
Yes.
the where it was less about necessarily the music as it was about the storyline, and then pop music started to use a lot more of just electronic sounds. I
Yes.
would debate that that's when it kind of started to change from uh being expressing through the music and maybe just like the instrumentalists, and maybe more so just about the music as a whole and the song. And then I
Absolutely.
kind of in that thought process kind of stopped myself because I'm like, but then there are bands like, or the groups like the Chainsmokers or something like that,
Sure.
and then through their electronic instruments they have a lot of space in that. And I
Absolutely.
was like, so I was like, there
Yeah, I
is
know.
a
I feel you.
double-sided, because I was about to be like, I completely agree. And then I was like, wait, hold on, do I? Because I hadn't thought about the other side of it. Because I've been thinking
Sure.
a lot about the organic instrument side of it lately. Because myself included, I started using a lot of samples, and I kind of
Sure.
in my music creation went away from using these like guitars and stuff, right? And now late, I've been introducing more guitar and leaving instrumental room, and guitar solos or even just instrumental sections.
I couldn't agree with you more on both sides of that because I literally I was filling in your words as you were talking because I completely agree with you that I think in terms of like traditional instruments, I think something's been lost there. And I think it's starting, I want to say it's kind of starting to come back because I'm starting to hear live, even saxophones. It's like
Yeah,
Grizz and Big Gigantic and all these places. They're playing saxophone at their live shows as their electronic, they have an electronic beat, brass tracks, give them a
yeah.
shout out. Like there's so many, you're starting to hear it back, but I would argue kind of like I want to say when I was in high school, 2009 through like 2012, it was completely gone, and that's when you heard like Skrillex was really popping off during that time.
Yeah,
Dubstep was popping off, and I was worried because I was in high school and I was like, man, nobody's using live instruments
yeah,
anymore. Like I would love to play on a Skrillex tune and scream on that as a live saxophone player like but you're right, part of my generation and then after me for sure, for them, I think electronic music is kind of that is expressing, a lot of emotions and feelings. They're hearing it through electronic, these different patches and on the Nords and
yeah.
all these different things on Audacity and like just all these different filters and stuff. So it's not to say that you can't express yourself through those things, but
Yeah,
I think that it sounds like, with like Lido and all these different artists that are coming out now, it sounds like we're starting to get a beautiful fusion of
agreed.
kind of live
Well,
instruments with.
the music industry moves very slow, and I would say it's kind of like that new toy syndrome that everybody has.
Yes.
So, and then you take that into the music industry. So I have this Korg mini log synth over here. It's an analog synth,
Right.
and I use it almost on everything now. But like when I first got it, it was like the only thing I used because it was a new toy, and it was like, well, let me try this setting, let me try this setting, let me try this.
Absolutely.
And I wonder, like you're saying, it's becoming a fusion now in the sense of like before, like probably I'd say the 80s, but as it got more popularized and as like DAWs, digital audio workstations like Logic and Pro Tools and Ableton became readily accessible in the late 2000s.
Right.
It was accessible beforehand, but like, you needed to be in a studio and it was, 10, 20, 30,
Absolutely.
$50,000 studio, right? Now it's available. You buy a Mac for a couple $100 and you can get it, for free with GarageBand.
Right.
Now that it became so readily accessible, I'm curious if it became this new toy syndrome where it's like, let's just use synths on everything. Or,
Yeah.
and
I
now
think
we're
so.
like, that was cool, but like I missed the
Let's
guitar.
let's bring
Exactly.
it back a little
Exactly.
bit. Right.
Well, as a perfect example is my favorite band, the 1975,
Oh yeah, I love
have
it.
toured, and even on their records, but also have toured with a saxophone player for as long as I can remember.
A
Always
phenomenal
a sax. Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. That's exactly what I'm talking about. It's it seems like bands like them, the other ones, the Midnight. I don't know if you've ever heard of them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Same type of vibe where it's kind of that '80s. And they have a fantastic saxophone player. I look up to those saxophone players. Like, I think that you're starting to get that fusion, like I said before, like
Agreed.
with Brass Tracks and all these other bands, where you're getting this fusion of traditional instruments with the expression of the electronic instruments and that EDM
Yeah.
feel. You're not losing that, which is still the trend now, right?
Yeah.
But you're getting more of that, the traditional instruments in there, and I love that.
Yeah. But it's also funny too because we are like nothing's new under the sun, right? So
Absolutely.
we're recreating the same conversation that your dad probably had and your grandfather probably had and his grandfather
Right.
probably had, in the sense that like in the 20s they were like, or no, maybe maybe a little after, but let's go like in like the 50s they were like, oh, these kids, they're not using they're not big band orchestras anymore, they want to use their guitars and drums,
Right.
electric
Right.
basses, and then
Right.
from there it was like, oh, now they're distorting the guitar tone. Like,
Absolutely.
who is this? Like they're cranking their amplifier. Like, so
Well,
it's
entire
always
genres of
been
music, from hip hop to bebop back in the day. Like,
exactly.
why are they putting these chromatic? What is
Exactly.
this? It sounds horrible. Like, you get
Yeah.
you're totally right. It's just a new. I'm sure how people were talking about bebop back in the day.
Exactly.
It sounds very similar to how I sounded in high school. I tell you, I just had this conversation with my drummer the other day. Shout out to Ray Correga. Like, I couldn't stand dubstep when it came out. I couldn't stand it. I was like, it just sounds like noise. Like, and guess what? People were saying the same thing about free jazz.
They're saying the same thing about Elvis, man.
Saying the same thing about Elvis to all the same. And eventually, guess what? Now I'm pretty into dubstep if it's used as we talk about how it's been used and how it's been refined over time, and how it's used more as an effect now on music, and how it's beautiful as that. It's I've totally had to eat my words, and that's how all of music has always been.
Yeah. Dude, we could take this back to like, in music theory, like back to like the 1500s when like
absolutely,
when for people that aren't super familiar with music, you have typically eight notes in the normal scale, I guess, rather than the chromatic scale, I guess you call it, right? The major scale, I guess, the word, not the normal scale, major scale.
Right.
And the fourth note and the seventh note, the fourth tone, seventh note, they have they're called tendency tones, right? They want to go somewhere, right? But they have some certain dissonance in them.
Exactly.
And back in the 1500s, they called them the devil's tones because they had this dissonant tone. So like we can't, you weren't allowed to, in the church, you weren't allowed to use those notes because they thought that they represented the devil, because they and it's interesting how things just evolve. And
yes.
So if somebody used a 7, which I love using the 7 because it creates such a cool, tendency to want to resolve.
If you play just that to somebody, a Generation Z or millennial, they're like, yeah, okay,
exactly. Like, but that was so crazy back in
absolutely
500
same
years
thing
ago,
with the blues scale.
Yeah,
same
exactly.
thing all that type of stuff was used.
Exactly.
Like, and like you said, you said it best. Like, the more things change, the more they stay the same. Like, if you play a Locrian scale right now, people go like, "Whoa! Like, where are you going to use that scale?" I was messing around with that with my friend Dino's, and my friend Mike, and he's a guitar player. He was like, "Yeah, I still don't know where a lot of places where you can use like a Locrian scale. Like, it's so distant." I'm like, "Well, give it time, to our
Yeah,
conversation."
exactly. Exactly.
you know,
Exactly.
like,
Well, I mean, I would say even it happened again, like maybe in like 2017. It happened with like Shakira, but then it started happening again maybe a little later, and like this, like the harmonic scale started coming out.
yes,
The belly
yeah,
dancing
like Dua
scale.
Lipa's
Yeah,
songs,
exactly, exactly, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
With that
yeah.
raised seventh.
Ariana Grande songs,
Yeah,
it's crazy how much it changed. And I was just talking to my friend Ray about how gospel music has infiltrated. It's obviously it's always infiltrated different aspects, especially of hip hop, but
mm,
how it's really infiltrated pop music. The
hmm,
popular music of hearing these chord changes. You'd hear it in Kanye West's Graduation album and all this different stuff, but like now you're hearing it. You'll hear it in a Taylor Swift song or a Katy Perry song, or like I said, a Ariana Grande song, where you're hearing these changes and these gospel chop type licks that come through. It's crazy how much it's changed, because you weren't hearing that in 2010,
yeah,
2011 ish. At least as prevalent as you hear now.
sure,
It's
absolutely.
crazy how much music changes.
Oh yeah, but it stays the same at the same time. It changes
It's
just
true.
because
Right.
now pop punk is coming back, which I love. I love it.
Yeah,
My probably one of my favorite genres. But that was very popular in the early 2000s and stuff, and now it's coming back, and
absolutely.
it's just funny, man. And
Yeah.
5 years ago was the 80s, and who knows?
Yep.
But
Yep.
I would just love to hear a little bit. I want to be respectful of your time, and so I want to wrap it up in the sense of like I want to hear a little bit of what you're currently working on and what you're looking forward to working on. In the next couple of weeks or years. What have you been planned for?
So that's been a complicated question, man. So I'm about to wrap up my time in the Navy. I got about two more years, and then I'm gonna see where life takes me. Right now I'm in this. It's probably the best band I've been in. The rock band here. We just lost our vocalist to he went to DC. They're called the Sea Chanters. They're a choir over there, the premier show choir over there, and he was that was Jay Nunn, Jesse.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. So that
Yeah,
was for anybody watching this. If you've seen the Jay Nunn interview that I had, that was the connection
yeah,
actually to have this interview. Yes,
absolutely. He's such a huge inspiration. I cannot give him a big enough shout out to him. How much a positive inspiration he's been to me. So hopefully more collaborations with him in the future. We're playing. I just had a few shows with the rock band down here. Hopefully in the future, they'll keep us together, and we'll continue playing some shows next year with this rock band. Now, we're called Passage, Navy Band Northwest Passage over here. So hopefully we'll continue working together. But right now, it seems like I'm going to give teaching a shot once I get out of the Navy. I'm looking at elementary music and kind of going that route. So we'll see if it ends up developing into something. I got some connections here and of course, my dad being a middle school band director, he's always wanted me to be a teacher.
sure, sure,
So
sure.
he's been pushing for that. And I was really against it for a long time because, and this is just me, I just felt like I wanted to do the job of performing and really achieve that dream first before I gave teaching a shot. I
Sure.
felt like now I feel like I can kind of offer something to the world and offer something to kids now that I've done it and I played around the
Yeah.
world. So I'm more open to it. So I think, the more I talk about it with people and the more I do my research on it, it seems like something that the world really needs for sure. I don't know if you've seen about the shortage of teachers, but it's also something that I feel like I can develop a passion for, because
Mm.
now that I've performed, I think I have the, I don't know, lack of a better word, qualification to kind of offer something to
Yeah.
kids and
Yeah.
hopefully, continue like we were talking about, hopefully inspire them to keep playing music. Because
Yeah.
I think I say we need it now more than ever, but we've always needed it.
It's the truth,
We
man. It's the
always need
truth.
more.
It's so true. That I completely agree with that. Absolutely. We've always needed it.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
absolutely.
One more final question about this, and then I have a question that I ask everybody as a final question. But this is a selfish question. Touring the world, as a foodie that I am, what were some of your favorite things to eat? Trying all these different cuisines.
I tell you what, I went to all these different places, but I gotta say, Japan was the best food I've ever had. I mean, it was just so special because any food, you can go down to 7-Eleven and get 5-star food from 7-Eleven that you can microwave, because the care that they take in everything that they put into all of their food is just phenomenal. So specifically what food, I gotta go with, I had this ramen in Ishimori in Japan, and it was not only some of the best food I've ever had, but it was definitely the best ramen I've ever had.
Wow, very cool.
That, and I had the seafood. I had the seafood linguine in, I think it was in Yokosuka. That's where the Seventh Fleet is based out of. But it was somewhere, a restaurant in Yokosuka that was unbelievable. That seafood linguine. I've been in Washington here, and no knock on Washington. I've had crazy seafood linguine in Washington, but it can't touch the seafood linguine I had in Japan. It was just unbelievable.
Now, this is probably the most basic question, but like the sushi there compared to here, is it a tremendous difference? Like,
I think so. People say, now I haven't had the sushi in California, because people say that the sushi in California is like just as good as the sushi in Japan, but so far the sushi that I've had here doesn't hold a candle to the sushi that I've had in Japan. It can't hold a candle, man.
I love it, man, and I really appreciate your time. The final question that I have for you, that I ask everybody as their final question, is being where you are in the music industry at the moment, I'd love to hear if you could give a piece of advice to yourself when you first began. What is something you wish you knew when you first started?
I've been thinking about that question a lot lately, and I think the number one thing I would tell myself is focus on what makes you unique versus focusing on the technical ability. It's not to say don't work on the technical ability. Of course, always work on the fundamentals and everything else. But for me, I was too obsessed growing up with the fundamentals and the technical ability of saxophone playing more than, I think, focusing now. I'm just now being like the past like 5-6 years, I'm just now focusing on what makes me unique, which is the entertainment factor. And I think I have a pretty unique sound on saxophone. I don't, there's other people that sound like me, but I don't think it's the main kind of saxophone sound. And I think if I could give myself that piece of advice, it would be to really hone in on what makes me unique, that rather than the technical ability. Because just like the instruments that we've been talking about, guitar, piano, drums, especially is vocals, there's always going to be somebody way better than you, right? On a technical ability. It's always going to be somebody that can do things that you'll never be able to do, or, whatever. But there will be no one that can play guitar like you, that can sing like you, that can play piano like you. And I think a lot of musicians, because we compare ourselves on Instagram, on TikTok, whatever, I know I catch myself where I'm like, geez, what am I doing? Compared to this guy, I can't even play saxophone, or whatever. But what makes us all unique is the expression, what we're talking about, the expression in that. So that's definitely the number one piece of advice I would give myself, because I think I would be in a better place,
enjoying the journey a little bit more, right?
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
Well, Jared, I really appreciate you taking the time. It's been an absolute pleasure. If you could hang out for 30 more seconds, I just want to say a big thank you, first of all, to you for taking the time, but also to every single person that watches video or listen to this wherever you're consuming this podcast, video or audio form. I really appreciate every single one of you. Best way to support this channel is by checking out my own original music, and then also go check out and support everything that Jared is up to. Thank you guys so much. Thank you, Jared. I really appreciate you guys. Have a great rest of your day. God bless and peace out.